excellent test match, a proper test match at Headingley, and timely after all the noise about the 100 and the state of English cricket. It was good to get a real classic of a test match under our belt, and it leaves the England versus India series really nicely poised at 1-1 with 2 tests to play. So it does mean that we will have a decider at Old Trafford. But ahead of that, we've got the Oval, and a good time to catch up with our old mate, Paul Newman. Paul, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Darren. You?
Yeah, not bad, not bad. Enjoying this busy summer of cricket, and loving the fact that test matches are back.
Yeah, you can't beat them, can you? That last test at Headingley was an absolute classic, and we've had a fantastic series up to now. And I just think it's brilliant that, as you say, at a time when Test cricket is probably under threat as much as it has been at any time for the last 20 or 30 years, it's responding with such fantastic matches. And in the case of Headingley, it was particularly important because that really was a bad, damaging defeat that England suffered against India at Lord's in the second test. And I really did think that might be it for England, that series. I know they've confounded us before. They've often produced some of their best performances when they are down. But I really thought the way they lost that and the fact that India are such a strong side meant that they could then go on and possibly win this series 3 or 4-0. It's not to be because of that magnificent performance at Headingley. And quite honestly, I just don't know what comes next now. It's 1-1, as you say, Darren, 2 tests to go. The Oval, the traditional venue for the last test of a series, is staging this 4th one. And then we go to Manchester in the middle of September for the final one. What could possibly go wrong with the weather there? And hopefully, if it stays dry, we're in for a magnificent climax. And I really have no idea what England side is going to turn up, what type of England side is going to turn up for this game, because they've been magnificent, they've been terrible, they've looked fragile, they've looked sensational. And I'm just looking forward to it, really. We're just in for a treat, I'm sure, whichever way it goes.
What is it about Headingley? It was obviously 2 years since the Ben Stokes test. It's 20 years since Mark Butcher, that magnificent innings against the Aussies. 40 years since Botham's, well, I should say Botham and Willis's test at Headingley. What is in the air up there? What is on that pitch that produces these games?
I don't know what it is. It really is the Headingley effect, isn't it? I must confess that it's often been my least favourite England venue. I don't know. There's just a feel about the place that it's not particularly welcoming from a sort of selfish point of view. The press facilities are the worst in the country, certainly amongst the test venues. The food's inedible. Not that us press people worry about food, obviously. And it's just not the most welcoming place, but it produces the most incredible cricket, as you say. And that test, particularly 2 years ago, the Ben Stokes test, I will never ever forget it. I mean, I've never particularly been a fan of the Western Terrace. I think it's a bit excessive, and a bit too much fancy dress for my liking, being a bit of a traditionalist, But to see them all rise as one that day when Stokes pulled off that miracle, and really it was a miracle that compared just as favourably with the Ian Botham and Bob Willis one, doesn't it? In 1981, which I was 15 at that time, and it's something that will stay with all of us who saw that and was influenced by it as youngsters forever. But the Stokes one almost topped it, and then we have another test like this, all out 78. England respond brilliantly with the bat of Joe Root. What can you say about Joe Root, the batsman? He's just sensational, truly world class. Now, there was a time when I thought he might fall short of being rated amongst the very highest caliber batsmen when he was slipping out of the Fab Four of Virat Kohli, Kane Williamson, Steve Smith and Joe Root. But now he's better than any of them. 6 centuries this year. Each one, there's an argument for it being better than the last century, taking his bat into a higher plane. And of course, this time he had a bit of support as well. David Milan came in and looked much stronger at 3 than Zach Crawley had done. And Haseem Hameed, of course, coming into his accustomed position as opener after struggling a bit at 3 at Lord's, and was brilliant. A brilliant half century, even though he got a bit bogged down before getting out on the second morning. But brilliant. And Ollie Robinson, what a find Ollie Robinson has been. Magnificent. 23 wickets in 4 tests. That awful start when those offensive historic tweets emerged during his first day as a Test cricketer. But he's overcome that. I do genuinely think he's remorseful for that. He's learned from it. And the bottom line is he's the real deal as a Test bowler. And it gives us considerable hope about the future of England's bowling at a time when, even Jimmy Anderson and Stuart Broad can't go on forever. So, yeah, another Headingley classic. After that 3rd day when only 2 Indian wickets fell, I thought, oh no, are they going to take this into a 5th day? If they get 150 ahead, are we going to see another Headingley nail biter? But then England, sunshine on Saturday, and England came out and blew them away. So 1-1, brilliant Test match, and the Oval's got a lot to live up to.
It was quite depressing after the Lord's defeat, and in the sort of post-match interviews, the body language, the demeanour of Joe Root, and indeed Jimmy Anderson, made you really fearful about the direction that the England team was heading in. But an incredible turnaround, and as you just sort of mentioned, the selection changes that were made and the adjustments in the order seem to have paid off a treat. Do you think going into this Oval Test match now that England really are in the driving seat, or is it still all to play for?
Well, people talk about momentum, don't they? And if that was a thing in Test cricket, England should have the momentum. But I can't see India not hitting back strongly. They're a class side, aren't they? India have a poor record historically in Test series in England. They've not won that many. I don't think they've ever won a 5 Test series in England. I think I'm right in saying that. But this looked like the Indian side that would do it, and it still could be the case. The biggest problem they have, I guess, is that Virat Kohli hasn't scored 100 for 2 years now, and he's just looking more like the 2014 Virat Kohli when Jimmy Anderson had him in his pocket, rather than the 2018 Virat Kohli, who was his magnificent best in English conditions. He's struggling, and England's bowlers are bowling superbly at him. They're swinging the ball, they're getting him to play outside off stump, and he's struggling. But they remain a formidable side. I think some of their problems have been self-inflicted in that Ravi Chandran Ashwin hasn't played yet in this series. Surely he plays on Thursday. He's a world-class bowler, ranked number 2 in the world. He's scored 5 Test centuries as well. He would strengthen that very fragile tail India have, despite what happened on the final morning at Lord's. So I think he will come in, and I think India will hit back strongly. It was interesting. I mean, India were very aggressive at Lord's, weren't they? Led by Kohli, really confrontational.
That was notably absent this time around. I mean, Siraj and really, I mean, it was like an India that we've never really seen before, with that kind of in-your-face aggression.
Absolutely,
it seemed to be missing a bit at Headingley.
Yeah, well, I think England got sucked into that and tried to sort of fight fire with fire at Lord's, and it didn't work for them. So they said, okay, we're going to concentrate on what we do. We're not going to be worried about what they do. But India were far more subdued as well. I don't know if Kohli sort of realised he went a bit over the top, or it was just the circumstances of India being on the back foot from the word go that forced them back into their shells a little bit. But I think maybe the sort of bad relations, as it were, between the teams, and there was quite a bit of spikiness and feistiness between the teams at Lord's. Maybe that down now, and we're going to see 2 more hard-fought but very fairly fought Test matches. Because I think if England do get dragged into that sort of thing by Kohli, that will play into his hands, and India will be back on the front foot.
I thought it was quite interesting that India took that approach, the whole style approach, with England missing Broad and Stokes, who would have probably been the 2 that might have been the best to kind of react in the right way to that, and maybe wouldn't have allowed the others to get sucked in the way they did. Obviously, Stokes is still out for a long time. Do we have any feeling on Broad's progress?
Broad's certainly out for the rest of the series. He's hoping to be fit for Australia, but we're not going to see him certainly in these last 2 tests. That's a blow. But we've seen a glimpse of the future, haven't we, in Ollie Robinson, who is also a feisty character. He's not afraid to give a bit back to the Indian batsmen if they try and have a word with him, or the fielders when he's batting. Craig Overton's another aggressive character. I did think when he's previously played for England that he's been a little bit short of the very highest level, Overton, but he's added a yard of pace. He's worked very hard at his game. He's a useful batsman. He's a good slip catcher. And I think he did himself a power of good at Headingley. So we're seeing, more bowlers emerge. All England's Ashes planning was about real pace. It was about the need to have express fast bowlers in Australia, and they've tried to build towards that really over the last couple of years. But their best laid plans have gone to waste because Jofra Archer's injured, Ollie Stone's injured, Mark Wood. Obviously, we know he's fragile. He's back and available for the Oval. Whether he plays or not remains to be seen. So they've had to go back in a way to good old traditional English bowlers, and that's fine in English conditions. Whether that will be a problem in Australia remains to be seen. But Robinson and Overton both had good Lions tours. They've both got bounce. They've got height. They're very tall bowlers. They've got height and bounce, so they could thrive in Australia. For the moment, as you say, England were lacking those characters who could have taken India on verbally and with their very presence and aura in people like Stokes and Broad. That, you know, that they were certainly lacking that at Lords. But the biggest thing now is that Joe Root continues batting the way he is. Robinson continues bowling the way he is. The incredible Jimmy Anderson, you know, just goes on. And as long as that continues, then we should have quite a climax to this series.
I'm quite obsessed with England's calendar this year, and the quirky nature of it. I know we're in strange times, but notwithstanding, and I'll work to this, but chronologically. Obviously, the Ashes is a big thing at the end of the year. Prior to that, we got the T20 World Cup. There's the distraction of the IPL. But as you said earlier on, we're at the Oval now, and traditionally this is the end of series climax. To my mind, it doesn't necessarily produce classic Test matches, and the atmosphere there always seems to be a kind of an end of term atmosphere. But it's different circumstances this time, and very strange that, as you say, we're really, you know, rolling the dice by going to Manchester in mid September, complete with galoshes, umbrellas, and sou'westers. What are you expecting from this Oval Test match in terms of how it's going to be, and what could we expect? I'm guessing it's going to be a draw, but what do you think?
Well, firstly, I hope we get the weather, because we haven't had a vintage summer by any means, have we? That really, you know, that obviously washed that last day out of Nottingham in the first test, which would probably have gone India's way, you think, but not for certain. So if it stays dry, I think we'll have a win for one side. Actually, I think we'll have a positive result. I'm not sure if it stays dry, we will see a draw. But I just can't predict it, Darren. I just can't predict it. It's so, you know, modern Test cricket is so volatile in a way, and it swings dramatically from one way to another. Whether that's the lack of preparation these days, whether that's because the games are so congested. You know, you're basically having a 5-test series in 6 weeks here, when it used to be played out over the summer. And maybe when one side gets behind, there's less fight subconsciously to try and make a go of it, because they know the next test is around the corner. And once that, I know India showed a lot of fight on the third day to only lose 2 wickets ahead in lead, but once they started losing wickets on Saturday, they were gone, and they were just not taking that into a 5th day or up until tea on the 4th. So I really don't know. If I had to make a guess or a prediction, I think England will be on top again. I think they've got their noses in front, as it were, by winning so emphatically at Headingley. I'd make them favourites, but only 60-40 probably. I think India will be stronger for Ravi Ashwin. I'm sure he's going to come in for Ishant Sharma. I think Shardul Thakur will come in as well. He can swing the ball, of course. That was lacking in India's performance at Headingley. England's bowlers were swinging the ball around corners. India's weren't, certainly in the first innings. I think, the only innings, of course, certainly on the first day, I mean to say, the only innings England had. So I think Thakur might come back as well, possibly for Siraj, who wasn't the aggressive, confrontational figure he was at Lords. He seemed to run out of steam a little bit at Headingley. So I think they'll make 2 changes, and they'll probably be stronger for it. India, England, it's a big decision for them. But they're making one enforced change, because Joss Buttler obviously is not playing to be at the impending birth of his second child. And I do actually think that might be the last we see of Joss Buttler in Test cricket. If he doesn't come back in time for Old Trafford, he's one of the players who's most concerned about the hard quarantine in Australia that awaits the players and their families. So I don't think we'll see him there. So I do wonder if he might just quietly now concentrate on white ball cricket. That's something that was denied by Joe Root today in our press conference, but I certainly could see that happening. I think Johnny Bairstow deserves to have the gloves back. He was very unlucky to lose them in the first place after the last Ashes. He's a happier cricketer as a keeper batsman. And I think England will be stronger for having Bairstow as a keeper batsman rather than Buttler. The big decision, of course, is whether it's Ollie Pope or Dan Lawrence for that batting position that's now been vacated by Buttler. And I think that's a real close call. I'm not sure England have made that call yet. Dan's had the advantage of playing against Glamorgan in the current championship match. But he only scored 20 odd, I think, didn't he? I don't think he went on to a big one today. Ollie Pope has long been considered, or for the last couple of years has been considered, the next great England batsman, but he's had his setbacks with injury and poor form, and he's fiddled about with his technique. He's looked a bit frenetic. So I don't know. Again, that could be a 60-40 call towards Pope at the moment, I think. But as Essex people, I'm sure we'd love to see Dan get another chance. He is a bit unorthodox for Test cricket, but he's very gifted. He's got a great temperament and mentality for the Test game. So I'd love to see him get another chance. And then the big question with the bowling is whether they feel the need to rest the bowler because these games come so thick and fast. The last thing you want to do is throw out that 39-year-old Anderson in there and he breaks down because of too much workload. You know, we saw Broad break down ahead of the second test, and Jimmy was a big injury doubt going into that test as well, but came through it. So it's a big decision there. How do you tell Jimmy Henderson he's not playing in the test match? But do you think it's best to save him? Joe Root bigged up Chris Wokes considerably when he spoke today. So I think there's a good chance of him playing at the Oval, and then it's whether Mark Wood comes back too. But I think so. England probably make 2 changes of their own. But I think whoever plays, you know, as we've said, it's gonna be a great game, particularly if the weather stays good, and it really is one that could go either way.
So looking a little bit further ahead, do you think we've seen all of the contenders for the Ashes squad, or is there anyone else that you think might be screaming out on the outside rail to get into the squad?
I don't think so now. I would have said David Milan before he came back into the squad. England invested an awful lot in Dom Sibley and Zach Crawley. They've both fallen by the wayside before the Ashes. Crawley will be back, I think. Sibley, I'm not sure. The name I keep on hearing is the Warwickshire opener, Rob Yates. It's supposed to be a hell of a prospect. But I think this Ashes will come too soon for him. But don't be surprised if he plays Test cricket in the next year or 18 months. But I think probably now we've seen all the players we're going to. And really, it's a question now is whether that tour takes place. Whether I
was just going to ask you, what is your feeling? What is the feeling amongst the press camp about it?
I think there's considerable doubt, actually, Darren. I mean, you know, the thought of the Ashes not going ahead is extraordinary, really, isn't it? But there is definitely a lot of concern amongst the England players. As many as 10 of them do not want to go if the hard quarantine regulations in Australia continue. That's even if their families are allowed to go in, but have to undergo 2 weeks in a hotel room. They're very concerned about it. Bubble life has hit them hard over the last 18 months. I know, of course, everybody's been hit hard. They've been fortunate to play cricket. We've been fortunate to watch them play cricket, but it's hit them hard mentally, and that cannot be underestimated. So I think there's a big question mark over whether the tour goes ahead. And if it does go ahead, England could take a second team, and it's a hard enough place to go at the best of times without going with one hand tied behind your back, which Joe Root would do if he has a second team with him. But we can only hope that something relents. But it is a huge concern, and obviously with Australia not having such strict rules on COVID at the moment and not allowing even some of their own citizens back into the country, the moral side of things has to be considered as well. And really, should we all be traipsing over there? I don't think the press are going to be allowed, but you know, apparently there's still a chance the press will be allowed, and if we can go, fantastic. But I certainly won't be banging on the door because there's a lot of Australian people who are not allowed to go back to see relatives at the moment. So we'll have to see, but it's a worry. It's certainly a worry, and I think a lot needs to happen for that tour to go ahead successfully in the next few weeks.
They delayed the Olympics, they delayed the football, and I think also with the Ashes, it's such an occasion, and you know, the whole thing of the packed stadiums, the presence of the Barmy Army, the level of interest in Australia, and when I've talked to Australians, you know, it's the one thing that they, as a nation, really get behind and look forward to. I can't imagine, as you say, a second string England team playing an empty MCG on whatever day of the week is going to be it's going to be an awful spectacle. It'll be an awful thing to be part of. Maybe the right thing to do is to delay it, put it back a year or so, maybe.
I think so. I think that would make perfect sense. Or even, you know, I even heard it mooted that it could be moved to the UAE, for instance, where the restrictions are far more relaxed. I think Australians choked into their Vegemite when that was put to them. You know, they don't want to concede home advantage. You can blame them, but these are unique times still. Even though hopefully we're on the road to recovery, and all things have to consider. The common sense course of action would be to postpone a year. But whether cricket takes a common sense course of action, you know, money normally talks. The Aussie board are desperate to get it on, but they're going to have to convince their government to get it on, really. So if I was a betting man, I'd say it will probably go ahead, but it will go ahead with a weakened England side. That's my fear. But I really hope they do consider putting it off, and then we'll just have to worry about next year's itinerary when that comes around, because it is the greatest of all series. It remains cricket's Olympics. It remains bigger than any white ball World Cup. It's the thing that Joe Root's captaincy will almost certainly be judged upon, even if he beats India. You know, he's his third series in charge against Australia. He needs to win the Ashes. So he needs to be able to choose from a full squad. And the only way he's going to do that, I think, is if it's postponed by a year.
Red ball cricket been hugely under the microscope this year. I'm not going to get into a debate on 100 or anything else. But just looking at the domestic game, county cricket, what are your thoughts on the current state of it? Is it in good health, or do we still need to put more work in to get it to where it should be?
I think a lot of work needs to be put in, Darren. I think it's really suffering by being in the margins. I mean, it was great at the start of the season because there were 9 or 10 rounds, weren't there, early on, but they played in April and May. It's hardly ideal, is it? Even though it was quite dry at that time. I had an open mind over the conference system, but I think that it's doomed, to be honest. I think it needs to go back to 2 divisions simply because the matches that are now taking place have no meaning at all unless you're in the first division. And I just think that needs to be looked at again, and we need to go back to 2 divisions next year. But no, I worry about red ball cricket simply because it's being pushed to the margins, simply because England players have had so little red ball preparation for an important test series. Okay, they got away with it in Leeds, and they may get away with it by winning at the Oval and Manchester, but none of them had any sort of preparation for this. We're trying to cram too much into the calendar. I'm not a fan of the 100 simply because we didn't need another format. If the same marketing and investment and enthusiasm and energy had been put into the Blast, it would have been just as successful, got just as good viewing figures on the TV at that peak time and on the BBC as well. But I'm afraid, you know, the Blast, which has been a huge success story, is being marginalised too. And I worry about red cricket. I worry about the Blast. I worry about the 50 over competition. We're world champions, both men and women. Yet that became a development competition this season with so many good players missing for the 100. I just think there's a lot to be worried about at the moment, actually. And that's not being an old dinosaur, which a lot of us get sort of criticised as being if we criticise the 100. There's a lot of good cricket played. I'm not denying that. And that's basically because cricket's a good game. You know, almost seems to take the ECB by surprise. Why do we have to have a new format to remind everybody that cricket's actually a good game? It's got a lot going for it. But at the moment, something has to give. And the fear, I think, amongst many in the domestic game is the thing that's going to give is a few of the smaller counties. And is that the ECB's intention deep down? Do they actually think that 18 is too many? And if we have some sort of city-based franchise thing, I think that would be at the expense of counties. That would be a tragedy. But hopefully that's some way off. But the red ball game, you know, Test cricket has shown the last 2 tests. It remains the last 3 tests. It remains the best game. That's the game we need to if we want to get young people infused in the game. Great, you know, I love 2020. I think it's a modern game that's been a huge success. Get them into that. Hopefully they progress and enjoy Test cricket as well. If you're young people coming into the game fresh. But do we really need another format? You know, sorry, I know you said you didn't want to make it about the 100, but nothing I've seen has convinced me that we need another format, and certainly not one at the expense of a fabulous competition like the Blast.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you 100% that all of those things could have been applied to the Blast and you've had the same outcome. There was nothing that couldn't have been done without, you know, you didn't need to reinvent the wheel. And also the other thing is the danger of going down franchise routes is that you're damaging the whole structure of cricket. That, you know, if you're an aspiring cricket youngster, there is a pathway through club, districts, whatever, counties to national level. If you start with the franchise, and the West Indies is probably a good example where all of a sudden players aren't even interested in representing their country or representing their state or island or county, whatever it might be. They just want to get to wherever they can get paid and earn money, which really isn't the best way to go with, you know, nurturing the sport at all.
No, there's no identity, is there, with franchise tournaments? They change players virtually every year. I just can't see that being sustainable, personally. I know the IPL is huge. I know other franchise competitions have been huge. But if that is the future, I do have huge concerns about the direction cricket's going, if that's going to be at the expense of the more established forms of the game. Absolutely.
Paul, many thanks for joining us, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks, Darren. Pleasure as always, and many congratulations on the success of your show.